Hi everybody, I'm Kavya and today I'm going to be talking through how to graph your data in a Google Sheets. This video is brought to you by the GSDSEF-SLB, and if you have any project-specific questions on data analysis or graphing, please contact us through social media on Instagram or email us. Okay, so to start off, I have this example piece of data that we'll be working with today. So there's some key things that you need to keep in mind when creating a data table or a graph for your project. So in order to make sure that you have a good and proper table and graph, you need to have these couple of things. So first off, you need the titles for your table. So in our case, we're working with the number of sales of different desserts as the temperature increases throughout the day. So we have ice cream, hot cocoa, and cake. So as temperature, we're trying to figure out what happens to the sales of these desserts as the temperature increases. So our titles would be first the temperature, which is our independent variable, and then ice cream, hot cocoa, and cake, which are our dependent variables. Make sure when you're labeling your graphs and your tables, you have your proper units. So for temperature, we have it in Celsius, and then for ice cream, we have it in number sold. That's our units. And then make sure also when you do have a table, you have appropriate decimals. In this case, we're working with whole numbers, which is why we don't have any decimals. But for example, if you're working with something related to money, then you're probably more likely to have decimals. So make sure you have the decimals that are rounded to the correct number of decimal points. I briefly talked about this before, but when creating your graph, you need to make sure you know what is your independent variable and your dependent variable. So in this case, our independent variable, or our variable that is constant, is temperature. So over a certain temperature range, we have different temperatures that are all increasing by 2 degrees Celsius. So from 10 to 32 degrees Celsius. And then our dependent variable is the different desserts. So these are dependent variable because as the temperature changes or varies, the dependent variable also changes depending on the temperature. So these dependent variables are not constant, which is why they're called dependent variables. Okay, so next moving on to how to actually make a graph in Google Sheets, Google Excel. Okay, so to start off, you want to make sure that you select all of your data points. And once again, as I said, when you do create your table, make sure in Google Sheets that you always start off with your independent variable on the first column and then your dependent variables following. And I'll explain why as to why this is important. So once you've selected all of your data points, you have to go to Insert and then Chart. And here you can see a basic line chart has been plotted for us. Thank you. Thanks to Google Sheets, we have most of the things filled in for our graph. Before we move on, you need to keep in mind that depending on which type of chart you want, you can choose the different types. So we have line chart, area charts, column or bar graphs, pie charts, and scatter plots, and etc. and things like that. Next, we have to look at what things of a graph that we have right now and which things are we missing. So the main important components of a graph are of the following. So we first need to have a descriptive caption or title. In our case, we can name our title the independent variable versus the dependent variable. So we can name it the dependent variable versus the independent variable. So we can name it the number of sales of desserts versus increasing temperature. And make sure to always add your units of degrees Celsius. Right now, all I'm doing is formatting it to make it all fit as to how I want it. How I edited the graph title was by just clicking on the box provided for the title space twice, and then that allows me to edit the title. Okay, next we have our two different variables. So as you can see, we already have our independent variable plotted, temperature, as this is why I was saying before, it's important to keep your independent variable in the first column in order for Google Sheets to know that this is your independent variable, and therefore it lets it graph based off of the dependent variables. So we already have our independent variable units in. But as you can see, we don't have our dependent axes title. And so you might be asking, what is some way we can do this? So I want you to go ahead and double click on your graph if you haven't done so in order to edit it. And then you might go up to a setup area. Setup is mainly talking about what type of graph you want, and it's mainly talking about exactly from the data how to get to the graph. And then customizing is customizing your specific graph, and that's what we can use mainly to change and edit our axes titles. So to edit our dependent variable, we need to go to chart and axes titles, and then we need to drop down to the appropriate title. So as you can see from here, you can also edit chart titles, chart subtitles, whereas usually you'll put your name, and then horizontal axis title, which we already have, is temperature, and the vertical axis title, which we need to edit right now. So for our vertical axis title, we're going to put in the text, sales, and the units, which is very important in dollars. So as you can see, the sales and its units has appeared on a dependent variable. So now we have our independent variable and dependent variable, axes, labels, and units, which are both very important. Next, Google Sheets has already distinguished different colors for our different data points. So as you can see with the legend that they've also provided, you can see that the blue line is the ice cream number sold, and then red line is the hot cocoa number sold, and then the yellow line is the cake sold. If you did need to edit that, you can always click on the legend and change the different colors. And then if you want to change the different colors of the specific lines, then you click on the line, and then you go to color, and I can change it to whatever color I want, for example, purple, and then that will also change it in our legend. So now ice cream is purple. So you can play around with these different settings for your graph. You can increase or decrease the size of the line. You can increase or decrease the size of the title. So if you want to have a larger title, then you can also do that for the ice cream, for example. And then also, as I was saying, the type of line. So in order to do that, you would click on the line, and then you would go to line dash type, and then you can have different types of dashed lines or solid lines. Also, if you wanted to plot points, then there's a place to have different point sizes. So right now it's on none, which is why you can't see any of the data points. But if I put it into 2 pixel size, or maybe even 10 in this case, then you can see that these points appear. Other than that, you can work around with the different customization settings and see what are the different types of colors, sizing, and things that you want. But these are the main things that we want you to make sure that you have in your data tables and graphs. And also, last thing to make sure, in order to just make sure that your graph looks clean and neat, I would suggest having evenly spaced grid lines and ticks between. And you can do this by directly clicking on the ticks or the grid lines, or going to customize and then grid lines and ticks, and then change the type of spacing. And that's the basics for graphing in Google Sheets. If you have any other questions, feel free to contact us on Instagram or email us at the GSDSEF-SLV email. Thanks everyone, I hope that helped.